All right, well, thank you. It's a real joy to be with you this afternoon and get to spend some time with you. As you heard in my bio, and as I just said, I, by training, am an anthropologist, and I love storytelling. So I want to introduce this topic of catalyzing change by telling you a little bit about myself. When I first started college, I was an accounting major. And I loved the order and the precision of balance sheets, and I had impressive 10 key skills. And I had ambitions of working as a CPA in a top accounting firm, but beyond that, I didn't really give much thought to what kind of impact I might have on the world. So imagine my surprise when I was sitting in the Intro to Women's Studies course I had to take to fulfill a general requirement, and suddenly a light bulb went off. Not literally, but figuratively, something inside me just sort of clicked. And now don't get me wrong, I still think that accounting is an important profession, but in that women's studies class, I really realized that I had untapped passion and skills that I could offer to the world. And I realized that I didn't want to just follow a path that suited me. I wanted to follow a path that actually moved me. And the first question I want to pose to you today is, what moves you? And the follow-up to that, the second part of that question would be, so what are you going to do about it? For me, the path that I decided to follow involved switching my major and then continuing to pursue my intellectual passion for social justice through a master's degree and eventually a doctorate. And along the way, I continually found myself propelled by the words of the influential feminist poet Adrienne Rich, who wrote, "The most notable fact that culture imprints on women is the sense of our limits. The most important thing one woman can do for another is to illuminate and expand her sense of actual possibilities." I took that to heart. Many of us are constrained by the thoughts of what is not possible, and the most important thing we can do for one another is to create and expand a sense of what is possible. And I wanted to take that sentiment a step further to create a sense of possibilities, and I believe that it's critical that in doing that we actively remove barriers and also expand access to real opportunities, not just possibilities. So as you heard, right now much of my focus is on removing barriers that limit women and others from historically underrepresented groups from advancing in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or what is collectively known as STEM. And people often ask me, why does this work still matter? The glass ceiling has cracked. Why is this still relevant? But the numbers don't lie. Although women fill close to half of all of the jobs in the US economy, they hold less than 25% of STEM jobs. And this has been the case throughout the past decade. Even as college-educated women have increased their share of the overall workforce. Only 1 in 7 engineers is female, and today women hold only 27% of all computer science jobs, and that number isn't growing. So is that because women aren't smart enough to be scientists and engineers? Or maybe it's because we have an image problem. Maybe it's because women and others from historically underrepresented groups do not have a sense of what is actually possible. When asked to draw a scientist, primary school children participating in a research project most frequently drew images of men. And the men in these drawings wore glasses and white lab coats. And in one version of the study that included 1,600 drawings, only 20, not 20%, just 20 total depicted scientists of color. So clearly, there is an image problem. And it's not just among school children. If you want to dress up as a scientist this Halloween, and you're a man, you might find a nice, respectable costume like this, a bow tie and a lab coat and some scientific-looking implements. If you're a woman, you might find this. So what messages do these images send about who is a scientist? If I'm a young girl interested in STEM, am I encouraged that I will be taken seriously because of my brain? Or is the message that I'm only valuable if I look good in a lab coat? And according to this image, a lab coat and little else. When asked about the paltry numbers of women in STEM fields, Jocelyn Goldfein, a director of engineering at Facebook, said, "The reason there aren't more women in computer science is because there aren't more women computer scientists." So it's a vicious cycle. And to interrupt it, we have to combat stereotypes, and we also have to create new images of what is possible. And at the same time, we have to transform institutions by removing barriers and re-envisioning how our social, our political, and our economic systems actually operate. That sounds easy, right? No big deal. Well, all we need to do is produce some large-scale comprehensive change that will lead to an increase in the representation and advancement of women and others who have been historically underrepresented in STEM. We can do that. Well, I joke, but at Oregon State we actually are tackling that very challenge. And we've received funding from the National Science Foundation, or NSF, to work on some strategies that will contribute to the development of a more diverse STEM workforce. Our project, which is called Oregon State Advance, has been awarded $3.5 million over 5 years, and we're just entering the second year of our funding. While we cannot possibly expect to completely overhaul our institution or STEM disciplines within that time frame, or that budget for that matter, we do hope to serve as a catalyst for change. So I'd like to spend the remainder of my time with you this afternoon just talking a little bit about some of the lessons that we've learned so far so that you can reflect on some of the ways that you might be catalysts for change, or individuals who expand what is possible for others in whatever areas move you. So the first lesson I'd like to share is that passion and persistence are critical. They're critical components of any change initiative. That doesn't mean that they're easy. Oftentimes, the path of least resistance may seem like the easiest, most desirable path. In some ways, this was my mindset when I first started college. And that's not to say that accountants can never be revolutionaries, but at the time, my interest was in doing what felt safe and comfortable. But institutional transformation requires the exact opposite of safe and comfortable. It requires that we become someone who asks questions about why things are done the same way that they've always been done. Can we change that? It requires being someone who speaks out about injustices, even when it isn't easy. And it requires being someone who risks individual criticism for engaging in actions that interrupt the status quo. Now, I'm not standing up here before you holding myself up as someone who is always perfect at this, and certainly not someone who's capable of doing this work on my own. Which brings me to the second lesson that I'd like to share, which is that we are much more capable of affecting change when we reach across our differences and work together in solidarity. And this applies both within causes and across them. For example, although I have talked generally about women in STEM, there is no monolithic group. And therefore, any strategies for change must be sufficiently nuanced. Some young girls are incredibly fortunate to have access to programs that actively encourage them to see themselves as scientists and connect them with resources to be successful. And it may be that what is needed to serve that particular group is the removal of barriers to access and exposure to more and more diverse images of women and people from other historically underrepresented groups in STEM. But other young girls, whether it is because they experience poverty or the effects of racism or other forms of systemic oppression, may not be sufficiently served by programs that encourage them to become excited about coding, for example. There may be more specific, targeted, and culturally relevant interventions that are needed to speak to their particular context. In other words, change isn't just about, oh, am I losing? Okay. Change isn't just about encouraging people to work harder as if we all had the exact same opportunities. So if we're truly committed to catalyzing change, we must also call into question fundamental differences in access to resources. Which brings me to the third lesson from our project thus far, and the final piece of learning that I'd like to share this afternoon. Personally, I am most interested in catalyzing the type of change that looks at transformation through a lens of social justice. Oftentimes we hear about diversity initiatives that focus on giving people the same opportunity. Look, all the people in this image have a chance to toss their paper into the basket. But the reality is that the closer you are to the basket, the better your odds. So if we shift from equality, everyone gets the same opportunity, to equity, everyone gets what they need to be successful, then we can really engage in systemic change that is also transformative. And this involves examining how our own privilege affects our values and our actions. It involves seeking to broaden the range of people who have access to opportunities to make meaningful contributions. And it involves claiming and caring for our identity, our needs, and our beliefs without degrading someone else in the process. So for me, this topic of catalyzing change is personal and it's urgent. It's personal because right now I'm focused on a very specific effort to help diversify academic science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's also personal because it reflects my individual commitment to be a catalyst to advance equity, inclusion, and justice. And it's urgent because back when I switched my major from accounting, I wanted to engage in action. And I wanted to work with others who not only envision what critical transformation might look like, but who are also ready and willing to help make that change happen and make it happen now. So as I wrap up my time with you today, I encourage each of you to find a spark of inspiration that lights up passion inside of you. And then find ways to work in solidarity with others who are committed to critical transformation. Develop strategies that will provide a daily way to embody the change we each hope to see within ourselves, our organizations, and our society. So I don't know exactly what moves each of you, but I hope that on some level I have illuminated and expanded your sense of what is possible. So thank you.